Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with another buyer's guide for you guys. This time we're going to be taking a look at a fan favorite brand with a bit of a storied past. This is the Simgot buyer's guide. As with the last few guides that I have done, this video is most likely going to be crazy long, so if you're here for the recommendations, feel free to use the timestamps below and skip forward to that section. I know your time is valuable, but for those of you who are here for the long haul, let's get started. Before we go any further, I just wanted to do a quick disclaimer on how I acquired each of these to help communicate any potential bias. Essentially, all of these here on the table were purchased by me with the exception of these two on the extreme right. The ET142 were sent to me by Simgot as a sort of prototype to help with the development of the second set of nozzles, and the EA1000 Fermat were sent to me to fill out this guide so I could feature everything under $300 that Simgot has to offer. Since these two were acquired for free, I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Simgot for sending me these two and for making this video possible. So as I mentioned, Simgot has a pretty long history in the IEM space, but today we're going to be looking at what they have for sale today that is priced at or under $250-ish. Simgot tend to give their IEMs cool code names, so I'll be using those whenever I can in this video. We'll start at the bottom of the range with the EW100P Shark, priced at $20 US. This one has a DSP version available for $25 as well. Moving up in price is the logically named EW200, also known as the Maze, priced at $40, with a DSP version also available for $46. Then there's a bit of a price gap until you hit the EW300, which I will call the XO, even though it doesn't have an official code name. This one comes in three variants: the standard version, the HBB collab version, and the DSP version, priced at $70, $76, and $80 respectively. Continuing to move up, you come to the EA500, which also has a DSP variant. You have the standard version, the DSP version, and then for $10 more, you get the LM version, which is actually featuring a different driver. Once you cross the $100 threshold, you find yourself at the $110 EM6L Phoenix, one of the older sets Simgot has for sale still. Moving up, the newer Supermix 4, sitting at $150 with its 4 different drivers and Harman-ish tuning. And then finally, at the top of this particular range, you've got the EA1000 Fermat and the ET142, which I personally like to call the Chameleon. Both of these are priced at $220 US. There are two additional sets for sale that I won't be covering in this wrap-up, those being the EA2000 Boson, which is sort of the original version of the EA1000 here, and the flagship EM10 Dream, which is sort of the Supermix 4's big sister. Those are priced at $320 and $440 respectively. I have not listened to either one of them. I have no experience with either one of them. This is the only mention I'm going to make of them for this video. While Simgot is perhaps most well known for their single dynamic driver sets, the XO, the Phoenix, the Supermix 4, and the ET142 are all multi-driver hybrids, and depending on who you ask, the impressions of Simgot's lineup as a whole is that there isn't a single bad set in the lineup. Is that true? Let's find out together. Let's go ahead and talk about the included accessories for Simgot's many sets, starting at the bottom of the price range with the EW100P Shark. The Shark here comes with the most basic setup of all. You get a set of clear silicone tips, and that's basically it. That's all you get. Moving up, the EW200 Maze gets you the same silicone tips, but it goes ahead and adds this cloth carry pouch, which is rather nice, plenty of room inside. It's your classic drawstring, feels decent in the hands. It'll do well to protect those metal shells from being bumped around, but nothing too crazy, honestly. From the Maze to the 300XO here, I think is probably the most significant jump in accessories. Not only do you get upgraded from the pouch to what I'm going to call Simgot's standard black pill carrying case. You got a mesh pocket here and a soft interior to protect any of those metal shells from scratches and bumps, but you also get a second set of nozzles that let you change the tuning to a more warm or a brighter set, depending on which one you prefer. You also get a different set of ear tips. You get these more solid core standard ear tips here. These will become sort of the standard on every Simgot set from now on, but you get all of these upgraded things in the package on the EW300, which sort of sets the standard. The accessories on the 500 and 500 LM, or 500 and 500 LM are mostly the same. You get the same pouch, you get the same swappable nozzles, you get the same ear tips. You do get a third set of nozzles on the 500 LM for 3 tunings, but that's basically it. EM6L, you don't get any nozzles at all. You get the case, you get the ear tips, but no nozzles to change the tuning here. Overall, still pretty nice. Same goes for the Supermix 4. Same case, same ear tips, no nozzles. No tunings change on the Supermix 4 here, unless you use an impedance adapter, which we'll talk about later. Nearing the top of the pile here, you get the ET142 and the Fermat. As you can see, the boxes on these two are mostly the same. These two do not come with the sort of standard Simgot case. These come with what I call the sort of upgraded premium Simgot case. You get the nice Simgot logo there. You get the Salute to Art and Science on the back. It's a magnetic closure here. You get a place to put some adapters here. You get a little mesh pocket here in the bottom. It's nice and soft on the inside. It's a beautiful, beautiful case, and it's standard on both the ET142 and the Fermat. The Fermat gets nozzles, as with everything else so far. You also get a card commemorating Fermat himself and his last theorem, for which the set takes its name. And you get 2 sets of the same sort of Simgot silicone tips you've got and everything else, but it comes on this nice ear tip card, which I always like to see, so we're going to set that over there. ET142, in my opinion, comes with the most comprehensive set of accessories. You not only get an extra set of nozzles, in this case they're gold, these are just the ones from the 500 here, but you also get a completely second set of nozzles, making for 4 total tuning nozzles. These are a bit shorter. You also get these black sort of wide bore silicone tips to change the sound a little bit more, and you get these shorter, wider, sort of solid core orange tips as well in the packaging, making for a bit of an better overall package. Plus, the cable on the ET142 is modular, which I think is honestly really, really nice. The cable on the ET142 here is the LC7 cable that Simgot sells separately. I think it's really awesome. As far as Simgot accessories as a whole goes, they tend to provide a decently solid set of accessories with their IEMs. The EW200, including a pouch at $40, I think should really be the standard these days. And I like that every IEM from $70 all the way up to, the high end comes with one of the 2 cases. I do wish that the Fermat came with the same sort of modular cable that the ET142 comes with, since they're the same price. But the Fermat is the older set here, so I can't really ask too much of it. Overall, I like that the accessories are sort of a differentiating factor. You have the premium, you have the mainstream, and you have the ultra budget options. I think it's logical. I think it works very well here. So let's go ahead and talk about cables. There are some sets that use the same cable here and others that have more sort of unique looking cables. We'll go ahead and start with the Shark. I mentioned this in my review of the Shark, but this is one of my favorite budget cables in the market today. It reminds me a lot of the cable on the Moondrop Chew 2. Has a lot of the same things that I like about that cable. It's not identical though. This is a flat sort of 2-wire design here. But everything else works really well. There's no chin slider. The ear hooks are very comfortable. It's got a nice right angle connection. It's not microphonic. It's not memory prone. It's just a very good cable for a budget IEM set, and it's probably one of my favorite cables at the budget end, along with things like the Gate and the Chew 2. Moving up in price, we come to the EW200, which is sort of a proto version of the cable that we're going to see for the next several IEMs. It's got the same sort of right angle connector here, the Y-split and chin slider. It does have a chin slider. It's a very chunky, very plasticky feeling Y-split, but it does have nice Simgot branding on it, so I can't complain too much. 2-wire twist that breaks up into individual conductors with the Y-split. It is very similar to the ones that we're going to see here in a second, except for it's got a sort of silvery gold color instead of a black and gold color going on. Again, this is a good cable. If you do opt, however, for the DSP version of the EW200, you end up with what is, in my opinion, a straight-up worse cable. You get this much cheaper feeling 4-wire plasticky twist. It is a drawn connector rather than a stamped connector. You do get inline controls with a play pause button and a microphone, but just the cable overall just feels worse to me. It's slightly microphonic because of those ridges. It's not completely terrible, but I do think that this is a downgrade in terms of cable, even if it's an upgrade in terms of sort of convenience and having access to a different tuning, but we'll talk about that in a second. The EW300, the EA500, the EA500 LM, and the EM6L Phoenix all essentially use the same cable. I'm going to grab the one on the LM here. You get a Simgot branded 3.5 millimeter connector. You get that black and gold wire weave that I was talking about. You get the more slim, svelte version of the Y-split. You get a metal ring type chin slider that sits flush against a Y-split and works well against the wires in case you're walking or on the move. And the 2-pin connectors are the same sort of clear plastic with dots on them for stereo indication. This is a pretty good cable, honestly. I like it overall. I think it works very well visually on the IEMs that it's paired with. I think it goes well with the black on the EA500 DSP here and on the EM6L, and it works well with the black on the EW300. Speaking of DSP cables, I have the DSP versions of the EW300 and the EA500 here. These are roughly similar. They're both using the same sort of right angle Simgot connector there, and the feature where the DAC is tucked into the Y-split. You can see how chunky those Y-splits are. And they're essentially the same cable, except for this is sort of that like gunmetal gray type color, and this is a straight up black to better match sort of the IEMs that they're paired with. The cables aren't my favorite. They're a little bit memory prone. They're not microphonic like they are on the EW200, thankfully, but overall, I think they're fine if you're looking for a DSP cable. I like the fact that the DAC is further up. It means the heat is further away from your phone, but not my favorite in terms of hand feel and sort of pliability of the cable. Then we come to the Supermix 4. It has a very similar design to the cables that we've seen previously. It just feels, in my opinion, a bit more premium. It's a little bit silvery. It's got a bit of a shine to it. The 2-pin connectors are no longer plastic. They are now metal, and they have much more easily visible stereo indicator rings. The connector has been upgraded a bit as well. It also has Simgot branding on it like the other ones. The Y-split is even more low profile, and the chin slider is the same sort of open ring design that sits flush. Fine cable here on the Supermix 4, nothing amazing. I do kind of wish it was modular, but I'm not going to hold that against it a ton. If the Supermix 4 cable was slightly shiny, the cable on the Fermat here is straight up blingy. It has a bit of a sort of silver foil, sort of speckle look going on it. Looks very shiny, very bright white compared to the other cables here. You can see it sort of shines. The 2-pin connectors lose the stereo indicators, though, which I think is an interesting choice. They are still there. You can see them marked in the inside there. They're just not as easily visible. Very similar Y-split and chin slider design to the rest of the cables, and very similar 3.5 millimeter connector. Just sort of a blingier version of the cable that you find on the other sets, honestly. Favorite cable, obviously, is going to be the modular one. It's the $70 LC7 modular cable that Simgot sell separately. It's very similar design language to the rest of the cables. You've got the same sort of Simgot connector. This one is, of course, modular. You get the same 2-pin connectors as you do on the Fermat, but they're missing the colored rings. They have the same sort of harder to see indicators there. It is a bit more understated than the cable on the Fermat. So if I put them side by side here, this one's a bit shinier. This one's more of a stark, sort of white. This one actually reminds me a lot of the white whale cable that comes with the High Senior Mega 5 EST. But yeah, other than that, it's the same sort of design language, same metal Y-split, same ring type chin slider. Very similar design language for Simgot on all their cables. I obviously prefer the LC7 the most, but that's what you're going to do. Like I said, I wish the Supermix 4 and the EA1000 here had modular connectors, but I don't think it's too big of a deal. 3.5 is the most widely available connection anyway, so it's not really too bad. I think there's no real duds in the bunch as far as cables go. I do wish the DSP cables were maybe a bit more pliable, but I know there's reasons for that since it's a digital cable, not an analog cable. But yeah, other than those two, I think all the cables here honestly work extremely well with all the IEMs they're paired with. In terms of design and construction, most of the Simgot sets tend to fall in a very similar design language. All of the single DD sets here, as well as the EW300, are sort of the same overall general design. They're all sort of standard shaped IEM shells with no bulges, comfort wings, anything else really going on here. The Shark is a bit of an exception as it's all plastic. The 200, 300, 500, 500 LM and the Fermat are obviously all metal. I will say that the 200 and the 300 are very, very close in overall shape and size. The nozzle geometry is a little bit different, but as you can see here, they're near identical in overall shape and size. And as a result, they're also very similar in overall shape and size to the 100 here. The 100 is just a tiny bit smaller overall if you're holding them sort of side by side like this. And again, the nozzle geometry is a bit different. This is obviously plastic. It's much, much lighter. But the design language for the 1, the 2, and the 300, all very similar. Speaking of similar design language, the 500 and the 500 LM are essentially identical in terms of shell, very similar shell geometry, very similar shell shape. They're basically sisters here, nothing really to look at. They take their design cues from the Fermat, which while it is a slightly different shape with the glass faceplate here, it's overall similar in terms of shape and size. The biggest difference here on the Fermat is going to be that grill there for the exposed passive radiator, which we'll talk about in a second. This vent here is much smaller, but as you can see, they're overall very similar designed sets. The 2 or 3 outliers in terms of design are these 3 sets here. The EM6L, the Supermix 4, and the ET142. The ET142 is probably the most similar to the rest of them. It's missing the sort of driver plateau that the rest of them have seen. There's no sort of obvious circle here where the driver is. This is a much larger driver in here. It's the planar. It's sort of similar-ish to the Fermat in overall shape. It's got a bit more of a chamfer going on there on the edges. And like I said, the funnel is very differently shaped, as is sort of the nozzle ramp. ET142 is using a planar, however. That's why it's sort of the outlier. These two, the EM6L is a sort of older school design. You've got these nozzles here. I have seen lots of reports of the metal here coming off. It's apparently just a resin nozzle under here. I haven't had that happen to mine. I've seen people use E6000 or sort of modeling glue to put these back on with no real problem. As long as you don't get any glue in the sound holes themselves, it's really not an issue. This is all resin with a metal faceplate. Probably the oldest design here. You can tell by the QDC connectors. It's a weakness if you ask some people. The fact that these are QDC connectors make this cable incompatible with all the rest of the IEMs here. Yeah, I think it's just overall a very smooth design, maybe a little bit dated, but I still think looks really nice. Supermix 4 I saved for last because it is the only sort of semi-custom shell-ish looking IEM in the Simgot family. You can see there it has sort of a comfort wing, and it has sort of a bulge here on the front. And yeah, it just doesn't really fit in with the rest of the family. It is a resin lower shell like the EM6L here, but the shape, as you can see, is very, very different. No metal on the nozzle there. It's fully exposed. And yeah, it's interesting to see the evolution from EM6L to Supermix 4 here. The shells here are overall, slightly differently shaped. I can't really find any build quality issues with any of them, except for, like I said, the nozzles and the QDC connectors here on the EM6L. The fact that they're all metal means that they should be able to sort of take a licking and keep on ticking. The finishes on mine have held up relatively well. I have seen sort of more well-loved all-metal Simgot sets having some scratches and sort of patina buildup on some of the shells, but they're honestly built extremely, extremely solid with the exception of the 100 here, which is plastic. But I mean, for $19, what do you expect at that price? So like I did with the Zigat sets, I'm going to go ahead and line these up based on nozzle size. I think that's very important. So this is the widest point on the nozzle. So if they have a lip, it's the lip. If not, then it's that portion there. Narrowest nozzles actually are the EW200. These are 5.7 millimeters here at the lip, making them the narrowest in the family. They are just a hair smaller than the nozzles on the EA1000 Fermat, which goes here, and then tied with it is the Supermix 4. Both of these have nozzles that are 5.75 millimeters in diameter. Next comes the EM6L. Those are 6 millimeters right on the nose in terms of nozzle sizing. And the rest is honestly quite easy. The ET142, the 500LM, the 500, the EW300, all of these are 6.1 millimeter nozzles. And interestingly, the largest nozzles in the family go to the EW100P, the little Shark. Interestingly, has the widest nozzles of the bunch. Super interesting to see here. Nozzle information for you guys. Hope this helps. Similar to the way I organized the nozzles here, I also wanted to shift them over to weight since they're all metal. And sorting these by weight is essentially going to tell us how much resin each one uses in the construction, because, I mean, it's obvious that an all resin set is going to weigh less than a set that's basically all metal. So logically, the Shark here is at the bottom in terms of weight. It is all resin, it weighs less than 6 grams total, really not a whole lot of weight going on here. Next up, interestingly, are the EM6L and the Supermix 4, both of these sort of resin-bottomed IEMs here. These are 10.4 grams for the Phoenix and sort of 10.6 grams for the Supermix 4. Not really a ton of difference between these two. It could just be my scale. I use it for coffee, so it's accurate mostly, but I don't trust it in sort of scientific accuracy. And that's all the resin shells that we have here. All the rest here are going to be metal, so the weight jumps up quite a bit. Interestingly, the weight also sort of follows the price. You have the EW200 coming in at 17.5 grams combined. Then you have the EW300 at 18.5 grams, so just a gram or so heavier overall. The LM and the 500 are actually quite similar. They both tip the scale at roughly exactly 22 grams, at least on my scale. 22.0 is what I got when I weighed both of these together. Then you have the Fermat, which is half a gram heavier than even those, 22.5 on my coffee scale. And then you have the big, chunky ET142, the fifth heaviest of all the IEMs that I've personally weighed, 25.6 grams. Only the Jomo Nautilus, the Moondrop Stellaris, the Fat Freak Quantum, and the Ico OH10 are heavier than these bad boys. Don't worry about the comfort ratings. Those are coming. I just thought it would be nice to know the exact weight numbers for all of these. You'll see them again in the spec section, along with the nozzles, as I think it's a big bearing for comfort. So just like with the Zigat IEM Buyer's Guide, I'm going to be splitting these into two groups for specifications. Here with Simgot, it's pretty easy to do. We're going to split them into single driver sets and multi-driver sets. We'll go ahead and pull up the specs for the single drivers. These are the EW100P, the EW200, the EA500, the 500LM, and the EA1000 Fermat. Yes, I know the Fermat technically has a passive radiator in it, but the single dynamic driver is the only one that's actually moving any air. The passive radiator is there for some flavor, which we'll talk about later. These are all 10 millimeter dynamic drivers. The main difference here is going to be the materials of the diaphragms, the back volumes, the magnets, all that good stuff. The Shark is packing a standard LCP diaphragm that's liquid crystal polymer, just like a lot of the other sort of budget DD sets. The EW200 upgrades to a composite diaphragm that's sort of part LCP and part diamond-like carbon, at least according to Simgot. It's supposed to give you the best of both worlds. The standard 500 uses a diamond-like carbon diaphragm, while the 500LM, as the LM implies, is using a lithium-magnesium alloy diaphragm, similar to what sort of the Moondrop Starfield 2 or with the Focal, like the Elex, the Clear, all of those have lithium-magnesium alloy driver diaphragms on them. Finally, you have the EA1000 Fermat. That is using a gold vapor deposition, sort of purple oxide diaphragm. We've seen that in a couple of other sets, but the EA1000 is one of the first ones who have actually done that. Of this group, only the top two, the LM and the Fermat, as well as the 500, come with tuning nozzles. The 500LM and the Fermat come with 3 sets of nozzles. The standard 500 only comes with 2. We'll discuss those nozzles and those tunings in just a moment. I already mentioned the weight and the nozzle specs, but here they are again. Yeah, these are, Simgot's classic single driver sets. This is what put them on the map. This is what they're famous for. And yeah, you can see they're putting good driver tech in every single one of these. But now let's go ahead and move to the second group, which is the multi-driver sets. These are the EW300XO, the EM6L Phoenix, the Supermix 4, and the ET142. The EW300 is a tribrid. It features a 10mm dynamic driver, a 6mm annular planar in that classic coaxial configuration that so many sets seem to use, similar to what you see on the Moondrop May or the Rose Technics Aurora. But Simgot has gone ahead and added their PZT tweeter for a bit of extra spice up in the treble region. The EM6L is what I would describe as a classic hybrid IEM. You get an 8mm high molecular weight diaphragm dynamic driver and 4 balanced armatures for the mids and highs. The Supermix 4, as the name implies, features a mix of 4 drivers and a quad brid configuration. You have a 10mm high polymer nano dynamic driver, a single balanced armature, a microplanar, and that PZT tweeter that Simgot likes to use. Just missing the kitchen sink in here, honestly. Finally, the ET142 is a hybrid, but not in the traditional sense. This is featuring a 12mm version of the new 4th generation planar driver, and it has the same PZT tweeter as the rest of the family here has. It is Simgot's only IEM to feature a large, full-range planar driver, which I think makes it pretty special. Of this bunch, only the EW300 and the ET142 feature tuning nozzles. The EW300 comes with 2 sets, whereas the ET142 features 4 tuning nozzles, the most out of any Simgot set. As with the last group, weight and the nozzle specs are down below. In terms of drivability, I personally didn't have any issues driving any Simgot set with the classic J-Sally JM6 dongle. I didn't get extremely boosted bass out of the Supermix 4, as we'll discuss, and I had no issues driving the ET142. All the rest of them just fell in nicely with that amount of power, and I really had no problems at all driving them with basically anything I tried to drive them with. All of the Simgot sets are extremely easy to drive, which I think is part of the reason that people tend to like them. In terms of comfort, personally, none of these presented me with any issues. They all fit me very well. The heavy ones have their weight carried very well by their ear hooks, and none of these had any issues with nozzle angle, nozzle size, or overall fitment for me. But y'all know I'm not too picky with fit. My ears are quite large. So once again, I handed all of these over to Mrs. Audio Amigo to evaluate in terms of comfort. Unlike the Zigat video, she will not be joining us today. She is very, very busy with work right now. So she gave me all of her comfort notes and asked me to relay them to you guys. So here are the results. She rated 3 IEMs as a failure on the tiny ear test with a score of bad. Those being the EA1000 Fermat, the ET142, and surprisingly, the EW200 Maze. The Fermat and the ET142 had the same problem, extremely large, extremely heavy shells. With both of these, she could form a seal with her ear tips, but it failed extremely quickly and easily with any mouth or jaw movement. These were just way too big, way too heavy for her and her ears, and just didn't work at all. The EW200 failed, interestingly, due to their nozzle angle and shape. Something about the way the nozzle sits here on the EW200 just didn't really work for her ears and her ear tips. She found that when she put these in, the seal almost immediately failed, just like it did on these two. And even she said that it was very strange. It was a surprising result, but this is why we do these tests, because we find interesting points of data like this. Now, the rest of the IEMs did pass the tiny ear test, but not to the same degree, so let's go through them. The 500, the 500LM, the EM6L, and the Supermix 4 all earned a passing score of technical pass. The 500 siblings and the EM6L felt large in her ears, but the seal that she was able to form here was very strong, and it stayed put even through laughter, talking, eating, or really, any other mouth movement. So these did get a technical pass, even if they weren't the most comfortable thing in the world to wear. Similar story on the Supermix 4, but she made the comment here that these weren't comfortable really all that much, but the seal here seemed to be the strongest out of this group here. For some reason, something about the nozzle shape or design here meant that the seal here was the strongest for her and it lasted the longest, even if these were the least comfortable sort of in the outer ear. The seal here was the highest quality, still only get a technical pass. That means there's only 2 sets left, the EW300 and the EW100 Shark. Both of these scored like a glove. Her favorites were the EW100P, Extremely small, extremely light, super comfortable, a seal that was better than even on Supermix 4, took a lot of effort to break, easily wore these all day long. She thinks the comfort on these is fantastic. Surprisingly, again, the EW300, very similar story. The extra weight here, she said she did feel it in her ears, but it didn't compromise the fit as much as she was expecting. Something about the nozzle shape on these too. Again, I don't know. She said that the fitment on the 300 here was a lot easier for her, a lot more secure, a lot better for her than on the EW200. So yeah, the 300 and the 100P Shark scored like a glove. More passes than failures overall, but only 2 sets rated as actually being extremely comfortable for long periods of time. As with all of my tiny ears test results, this is one person's data, so your mileage may vary on these. I would advise, again, try them before you buy them, especially if they're going to be your only set for long listening sessions. So before I get into the audio section, I'm going to do my usual sort of tuning primer. What I'm going to say is, like Moondrop, Simgot tend to tune their IEMs to hit specific targets. What I'm going to talk about here is going based on their marketing materials. There are 4 targets that they try to use to tune their IEMs. It's their H2016 target based on the Harman 2016 curve, the Harman 2019, or H2019, again, based on the Harman 2019 curve. Simgot also has their own sort of Simgot Classic tuning, which is something they try to hit on a bunch of these, and also Simgot's Golden 2023 target, which is their sort of newer curve. All of these are variations on the classic V-shaped tuning. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a graph from all the sets I'm going to feature today with the labels removed. And these are the graphs of the nozzles that came on the IEMs from the factory. Notice anything? Yeah, they're all roughly similar in overall graph shape. There's a few outliers here and there, but overall, Simgot has what I would call a house sound. To try and help digest these different tunings, I'm going to talk about what target each set is trying to hit and go ahead and address all the different nozzles and the sets that have nozzles and talk about how they change the sound. So we'll start with the easy one first, the EW100P Shark. Nozzles don't go anywhere, only has one tuning. It's Harman 2016 inspired. It is the only set on the table, actually, that is said to target the Harman 2016 target. So interesting, we'll keep that in mind as we go through the tonality section here. Moving on to the EW200, it technically has 2 tunings, but since these nozzles don't go anywhere, the second one requires you to buy the DSP version and use a stock cable on this to get, analog cable on this to get the stock tuning. The main difference between the two is pretty subtle. I'll go ahead and pull it up. It mostly manifests as having slightly cleaner mids at the cost of some overall bass energy. In my opinion, it isn't a massive change, but it is noticeable. Simgot tends to change their sets a little bit to more of a bit, as we'll see with some of the sets later, depending on how much DSP correction they do. I will say that on the EW200 here, both of those tunings are targeting the Harman 2019 target. Yeah, classic V-shape on this. The EW300 technically only has 2 tunings, but again, throw on a DSP cable and you get 4. I did an entire video on it. You have the silver nozzles, which follow the Harman 2019 tuning target, and the gold nozzles, which I have equipped here. These follow Simgot's new Golden 2023 target. Both of those tunings are slightly changed by using the DSP cable, hence the 4 different sounds. The DSP tunings here, I'll go ahead and pull them up, tend to reduce mid-bass and mid-treble energy, giving for a slightly cleaner, a bit more relaxing sound. It isn't a massive night and day difference, but again, if you're really into personalizing your sound, I would go ahead and get the DSP version just to see which one you prefer. Like the EW300, the EA500 here also has 4 tunings. That involves buying the DSP version to unlock them, just like with the 300. The red ringed nozzles on the EA500 are Harman 2019 expired, and the black rings are Golden 2023 inspired. Honestly, I switched between them. I didn't hear all that much difference between them. The major difference I heard was honestly not changing the nozzles, it was using the DSP cable. The DSP tuning on the 500 is probably the most obvious one of all the DSP-enabled Simgot sets. It changes the sound in a noticeable way to me. It boosts sub-bass and reduces the lower mids energy. and it sort of turns the standard EA500 into like a mini, slightly less bright version of the EA500 LM. It's interesting. I'll talk about that in a minute because I think this one is going to be pretty cool. So, speaking of the 500 LM, it doesn't come with a DSP version, but it has a third set of nozzles. The gold nozzles, which is what Simgot refers to as a warmer and mellower version of the Harman 2019 target. Again, the silver nozzles with the red rings are their straight-up Harman 2019 target, and the ones with the black rings are they're targeting their golden 2023 tuning. In practice, honestly, the gold nozzles and the silver nozzles with the red rings sounded nearly identical to me. And if you look at both my and other reviewers' measurement and graphs, I think it's pretty standard to assume that. So if we assume that the red ring nozzles and the gold nozzles are the same, you really only get 2 tunings on the LM, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like with the Shark, the EM6L's nozzle isn't going anywhere unless it comes unglued. But that doesn't mean that the tuning necessarily changes. It only has 1 tuning. It's inspired by the Harman 2019 target. As I've mentioned in some of my reviews, it doesn't necessarily comply super well to the Harman 2019 target, but I think that's in a good way. Speaking of Harman 2019, Supermix 4, no included way to change the tuning via nozzles or DSP cable, but I mentioned earlier that it has sort of a secret bass head mode. Essentially, if you use the Supermix 4 here with a source that has a higher than normal output impedance, or you use an impedance adapter on it, go ahead and pull up the graph, you unlock what I call the Supermix 4's secret bass head mode, a full-on balls-to-the-wall bass head tuning that I discovered while doing my impedance adapter testing. It is a ludicrous amount of bass, and if you have a Supermix 4, I highly recommend trying it at least once. It is ridiculous amounts of fun. Don't make it the standard tuning. Just every once in a while, throw an impedance adapter on there. It is ridiculous amounts of fun. Next, we have the EA1000 Fermat. Like the 500 and the 500 LM, this comes with nozzles. You get 3 of them here. Unlike the 500 and the 500 LM, though, I actually was able to hear a distinct different sound with all 3 of them. I'll go ahead and pull up the graph for you here. The gold nozzles on the Fermat are inspired by Simgot's Golden 2023 target. The silver with the red ring, again, are Harman 2019. And the silver with the black rings are classic Simgot, which is the first time that I've seen that here today. Talk about that in the tuning section. Pretty interesting here. Finally is the ET142, which I have nicknamed the Chameleon. It has 4 sets of nozzles. To me, that only manifests as 3 different tunings, since the gold nozzles and the titanium nozzles are very, very similar. Simgot doesn't list tuning inspirations for the other nozzles on the back of the boxes or on their website like they do for the rest of the sets. All they really say here is tuned to the Golden 2023 target. I, however, describe the 3 nozzle tunings here as S12, S12 Pro, and SO8. The SO8 tuning is the red-ringed short nozzles, the S12 Pro is the black-ringed short nozzles, and the S12 is these gorgeous burnished titanium nozzles, or the gold ones if you want that little bit extra, vocal shoutiness or energy up there. Since all of these tunings are so similar, the tier list approach of ranking these sets in these videos I think is going to work out fairly well. One thing I do want to say is that since there are technically 22 different sounds here for me to listen to and rank, and I kind of have to get this video out relatively quickly, I will only be talking about the sort of average that a set can achieve, unless there are extremes differences in tuning, which I will mention, and you'll see that in the upcoming tier lists. But let's go ahead and stop the talking and go ahead and get into the tonality and how they rank in the different tonal categories for me personally. So now in new lighting, thanks to the camera issues that I had last night, we'll talk about the bass finally. While all the Simgot IEMs have some sort of bass boost going on, the level of the bass boost is going to vary model by model. At the bottom of the stack, we have the EW100P. I think it has just enough of a bass boost to balance out the brighter sort of upper mids and treble tonality. It's the least amount of bass from all the Simgot sets, and it makes it sort of one of the brighter sounding sets in the family. The middle of the sort of tier list does get a little bit complicated just because of the way that the bass is addressed from set to set. I will say that the Fermat, for example, has really nice mid bass, but the sub bass tends to roll off a bit into the lower frequencies. And the Supermix 4 is sort of the opposite. It has big sub bass presence, but the mid bass is some of the most subdued of the entire Simgot range. I've gone ahead and placed them together in the same tier, as they're both really nice in some ways, but lacking in other ways. Up one tier, we find the EW200 and the 500LM. They're both very similar in bass curves to the Shark, just with more energy overall. So similar overall, sub-bass, mid-bass presentation, but more energy across the whole range. These two sound punchier, more substantial, helps balance out the signature a little bit more. Up one level from those two, we find the regular EW500, or EA500, as well as the EM6L. The 500 DSP, and the EM6L, I feel, are a great balance of sub-bass rumble and mid-bass rumble. Even if the sub-bass doesn't reach quite Supermix 4 levels, it's still very satisfying to hear, and the sort of texture on those is really, really nice. The standard EA500 has weaker sub-bass compared to those two, but it makes up for it with more mid-bass presence, so it has a bit of extra punch and a little bit of extra slam that can compete with sets that are even in the top tier of this ranking. Speaking of that top tier, we have the EW300 and the ET142. For the ET142, take Supermix 4's sub-bass, add in the EM6L's mid-bass, and you essentially get the ET142. If you take the ET142 and boost the bass even more, you get the EW300, which is by far the bassiest Simgot set in this roundup, if you use the gold nozzles. The silver nozzles are much more in line with the ET142. While none of the IEMs on this table are what I would refer to as bass light or bass shy, as even the little Shark is packing a decent little bass boost, the bass boost is executed extremely well in the classic Simgot style. It almost never intrudes or bleeds into the mids, and it's overall very controlled, even on the bassier EW300. Speaking of the lower mids, here they are, and they're much more straightforward in terms of comparison, as there's relatively small deviations here. The Simgot house sound is relatively similar in this area. At the very bottom, we find the Supermix 4 and its Harman-style mid-bass tuck. It makes it have the leanest, cleanest sounding lower mids in this range. You're either going to love or hate that style. If you perceive detail in the lower mid-range, it'll probably be to your tastes. I personally don't prefer it, but it is the sort of least energetic of all the Simgot sets in the lower mids. The next tier up is a massive pileup featuring the EA500 DSP, the EA500LM, the EW200 Maze, and the EW100 Shark. All four of those feature what I would call clean but not warmed over mids. They're just energetic enough to give them a good warm tonality. There's a little variation between this tier itself, but they're mostly even thanks to the sort of mid-bass and upper mids tonality, making things sound relatively similar. Up one tier, we find the EA500, the EM6L, the EA1000 Fermat, and the ET142. All four of those are also mostly even. These feature even warmer, what I would call lush, richer lower mids. I tend to prefer this tonality, so this is where my sweet spot ends up. This is also where the EW300 would go if it was using the silver nozzles, as those are the less warm of the two. Speaking of the EW300, at the top tier, once again, we find the EW300 using the gold nozzles. While I personally wouldn't say that the EW300 with the gold nozzles has warmed over or huskier, tonally affected lower mid-range presentation, they are warmer than the rest of the sets on this roundup, and some reviewers do tend to find it a little bit too hot for their tastes. I quite like it. As I said, Simgot tends to keep things very well controlled, even on their warmer sounding sets. I think the tonal characteristics are quite nice. It makes male vocals pop nicely. It's just a nice, rich, warm sound overall. Moving on to the upper mids, and how these sets essentially treat female vocals and their sort of first-order harmonics. At the very bottom, we find the ET142 with the red nozzles. While the vocals on the ET142 are nice and forward by comparison if you look at the whole tuning, and I actually like the way that it presents harmonics, compared to the rest of the family, it is by far the least energetic vocal presentation of the bunch. The ET142 with the red nozzles just doesn't emphasize vocals over what I will say the track demands. It's very neutral in terms of vocals. Moving up, we find the EW300 and its gold nozzles. It's a step above the ET142, but again, it doesn't quite reach the level of excitement as the rest of the family. Its cousin, the EM6L, is a step above that, with, again, a little bit more energetic performance compared to the other two. And then we have a classic 3-car pileup involving the EW siblings, the 100P, the 200, and the 300 with its silver nozzles equipped. These three are quite energetic, but I personally don't find it shouty or fatiguing or nasally in tonality. I think it's a good sort of blend between super sparkly female vocal harmonics and subdued female vocal harmonics. One step above that, we find the Fermat, the Supermix 4, and the standard EA500. The Fermat is mostly here because it's the most forward with vocals out of any of these sets, but the harmonic energy is overall quite subdued, and it's not exactly fatiguing like the Supermix 4 or the 500 can be. Those are less vocal forward, but the harmonics carry a good bit more energy, putting the fundamental frequencies a bit more emphasized. Then you have the 500 LM, which is a step even above those two, and this is where things start to get a little bit too forward harmonically speaking. It starts to affect vocals. I personally don't find it to be too shouty, except with certain female vocalists. A lot of people tend to find it a little bit nasally. I personally don't hear it too much, except for some older, like 70 Master Pops tracks. Again, you're either going to really like this presentation or you're going to just immediately hate it. At the very top of the heap is the ET142, but this time with the gold nozzles. In this configuration, the ET142 is the shoutiest of the family, and you will either absolutely love this extremely forward vocal tonality, or you will find it extremely nasal, tonally awkward, and just wrong sounding. The interesting thing about this tuning is, like with the red nozzles, the harmonics are sort of subdued so that you get very well controlled harmonics. You have a very forward set of fundamentals and sort of first and second order harmonics, but the rest of them are controlled, and the sort of singer's format is the main focus of this tuning. I can see people really not digging the more sort of energetic forward harmonic presentation. It's a big preference thing, so your preference will probably vary somewhere in this range. I know a lot of people who really love that more forward shouty tonality. I'm somewhere in the middle, but they're all generally emphasizing vocals in one way or another. Now we come to the more troublesome area for Simgot in general, at least if you go by their sort of reputation online. Simgot has a reputation for having very detail-focused, bright, sparkly tunings that can cause listener fatigue after not too much time. The ET142, however, and its red SO8 style nozzles are just the opposite. ET142 is relaxed, chilled out, just warm and lovely, and it does all of that while still having pretty good detail retrieval up in the treble thanks to the PZT and that planar driver. Same can be said of the EW300 when using the gold nozzles, but I will say that it is the less detailed of the two. Both of these are by far the most relaxing Simgot sets to listen to. Even the ET142 with the gold nozzles has just a hair more treble sparkle than the EW300, making it a relatively safe choice. Most of the energy there is in the upper mids. The EM6L is also one of the safer choices. I think the EW300 with the silver nozzles and the 500 in its analog tuning sort of straddle the line between energetic with enough sparkle and relaxing. These are just sort of nice Goldilocks zone, if you will. As we move up, the Supermix 4 is where things start to get what I would say nice and bright and sparkly. It packs a pretty good amount of treble energy, and it's the first set where I've seen people calling this set straight up fatiguing, even if I personally don't feel that way. From this point on, it's relatively small steps in treble energy with the potential for fatigue increasing accordingly. We have the EW200 next, followed by its slightly brighter little sister, the EW100P. Again, I personally don't find these fatiguing, but lots of people online do tend to find that. And then at the top, we have the bright boys. We have the Fermat, the 500 LM. The Fermat, in my testing, sort of sits between the more calm, relaxed sort of EM6L regular 500 and the super bright sounding 500 LM. It's the sort of middle ground between those tunings. At the top, the 500 LM is well known for being extremely bright, sparkly, extremely detailed. It is probably the IEM on the table that has the most well-deserved reputation for being a fatiguing IEM. People do foam mods to it. People put tape on the nozzle to try and calm it down. I think reports of its ear-splitting tonality might be slightly exaggerated. Don't get me wrong, if you're treble sensitive, absolutely steer clear of the top 3 or 4 of these. I just don't think they're all that bad, especially if you use the gold nozzles on the LM. I find it palatable, but I also don't blame you if you listen to these for 30 minutes and went, yeah, no, this is way too much for me. So, technical performance. Technicalities is an area where Simgot tends to do pretty well. Their reputation online is that they're extremely technical for the price. I find a lot of that is down to the tuning. But also, the fact of the matter is, Simgot is known for putting higher quality drivers in their sets than some of the competition. Most people associate Simgot sets with some of the best detail retrieval and technical performance at their respective price tiers. And honestly, you would be mostly correct, especially after comparing these with things that are in their price range. There are a few sets that haven't stacked up too well at their price point. The EW100P and its LCP driver, I don't think are head and shoulders ahead of the rest of the sets in this price range. I'd say it's even, not better, but not worse. Same, honestly, goes for the EA1000 Fermat, mostly because it's an older set, and there are a lot of multi-driver hybrid tribrid sets living in its price range now. It's still a fantastic set, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not the king of technicalities at $200. The EM6L, EW300, and the ET142 are competitive, but I don't think they're the kings of their price range. I think that they're above average in terms of technicalities. They just don't dominate the price range. The EM6L is still great, as is the EW300, and their driver configurations are relatively popular in their price range. And while the ET142, again, might not be head and shoulders ahead of the rest of the other $200-ish planar sets out there, it's still one of the better planar sets in terms of overall technical performance due to the lack of dampening on the titanium and gold nozzles, and the PZT adding a little bit of airiness to the top end. The rest of the Simgot sets, the 500, the 500LM, the Supermix 4, and the EW200, I do think are extremely strong contenders in their price range. The 500LM in particular might be one of the best technical performers under $100, and I think it'll be a while before we see a set that really tries to take that crown. It does beat out the standard 500, mostly I think due to the tuning. And while the Supermix 4 has some very stiff competition, specifically the Truth Ear Nova, the tuning Simgot gave those four drivers I think really shines in a technical sense. It's right up there with the best of the best in the $150 space. Finally, I have to give mad props to the EW200. For a while now, it has been the sort of budget gatekeeper of the $40 price range, showing everyone what is possible at $40 in terms of technical performance if you're willing to put an extremely nice driver in a more budget-oriented package. And while it doesn't have the top step of the ladder all to itself anymore, it's still the gatekeeper to this day for a very good reason. As I mentioned with the Zigat Buyer's Guide, Soundstage is an extremely subjective thing to measure. It's going to depend entirely on your ear anatomy, how you personally perceive Soundstage, what tracks you use to test that spatial information, and how your brain is sort of connected to your eardrum. All of that said, this has been my experience with Simgot sets with my testing tracks. The EW300 is at the bottom. It's honestly nothing special in terms of Soundstage for me. I wouldn't say it's below average, but it's nothing above average either. It's just sort of normal. The EW100P, the 200, the 500, and the 500LM are what I would say a little bit above average for IEMs in terms of Soundstage. I would say they're maybe a little bit wider than, for example, the other IEMs at their price point, but they don't absolutely blow me away. The EM6L, the Supermix 4, and the ET142 I would say are straight up good. I think that they're a step above the competition at their price point, and they're near the top overall in terms of what I think Soundstage is possible on IEMs. And then at the top of the heap, you have the EA1000 Fermat, which really hasn't been doing too well in this comparison, but in terms of Soundstage, for me and my ears, is honestly something really special. I think it's all down to how my ears perceive that open, passive radiator at the top of the shell. The Fermat reminded me a lot of the Fur Audio RN6. That passive radiator, I think, pushes the sound field in my ears out wider than I'm used to. It even gets a little bit tall in some areas. I think it's an extremely unique party piece for the Fermat that helps it stand out compared to not only its little sisters, but other sort of premium single DD sets in that price range. But now it's time for the most controversial tier list. It's my personal best in sound rankings. As with the Zigat Buyer's Guide, these are my subjective rankings and are essentially based on how often I reach for these to listen casually. At the bottom, we find the entire single DD lineup under $100, barring one. It's not that I think that these sets aren't great, but their sort of brighter tuning keeps me from reaching for them in a sort of casual listening sense. I want to relax when I'm casually listening. I don't want to critically listen to things. And when I do want this sort of brighter Simgot house tuning, there are other Simgots that I reach for. So it's not that I don't like the 100, the 200, or the 500LM. It's just that I'd rather listen to the other family members. Speaking of, the Supermix 4 I think is a fantastic set, and it gets a decent amount of time in my ears, but honestly, if it is in my ears, I'm using it to switch back and forth between the standard and the obscene bass head mode for some stupid bassy fun. Switching tunings like that on the fly with your library on shuffle can just be a really fun way to unwind. Speaking of fun, When I do want that brighter Simgot single DD tuning, the one that I reach for is the Fermat over the other sets. Why? Because that passive radiator and the soundstage effects that it has on my specific ears make listening more immersive, and getting lost in the music is extremely relaxing. Up one step from that are the EW300, the EM6L, and actually the EA500 with the stock analog cable. All three of these see decent listening time thanks to their more relaxed V-shaped tuning compared to the rest of the family. The EA500 in particular has been a pretty awesome little surprise with its standard analog tuning. I need to buy it a nice black cable to match the shells here. I think it deserves a lot more credit than it gets. While all three of these do have boosted upper mids and treble to a good degree, it's less intense than the rest of the family, and their lower mids and mid bass are on the much warmer side compared to the rest of the family. These three are what I call the easy listening trio for Simgot. I said this in my review of the EW300, but I think the EW300 is essentially the baby EM6L. They're sort of cousins. And with the DSP tuning, the EA500 DSP can join that club as well thanks to the elevated sub bass, even if I prefer the mid-bassier presentation of the analog cable. Lastly, at the top of the list, no surprise, it's the ET142. And if you saw my review of the ET142, you know why. The Chameleon, as I call it, does a little bit of everything. It can imitate 75 to 80% of all the other planar IEMs on the market using its 4 different nozzles. It can range from bright, technical, and analytical to dark, relaxing, and just warm. It's honestly a pretty epic little set of IEMs, and of all of these, it's the one that gets the most listening time in my ears. Simgot's lineup is generally pretty straightforward. You can tell which sets are related to which other ones thanks to their naming scheme, and their clearly communicated target tunings on the back of the box and on their website make picking one that you want to listen to pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and go through all the sets individually like we did with the Zigat Buyer's Guide, and rank the ones that I haven't ranked on my ranking list, and go through sort of the competition at their price range and if I think it's worth buying or not. We'll go ahead and start with the EW100P Shark at $20 US. This budget set is the entry point to the Simgot brand. It's an excellent representation of the sort of tuning you can expect on most of its older siblings, but it's a little bit more bass shy compared to its big sisters. In my review, I compared it to the 7Hz Zero and the Truth Ear Gate, and since then, the Warner Studio Edition and the KZ X Angel Ears Libra have come out with also sort of similar tunings. Of these sort of budget, bright, neutral-ish tunings, the Shark is probably one of the most energetic in terms of treble harmonics. It's also the least vocal forward, but honestly not by all that much. The Zero and Libra X are packing less bass than the Shark overall, and I would say that the Gate is actually better with bass, at least in terms of sub-bass rumble. As I mentioned in the Technicalities section, I don't think that the Shark is miles ahead of all of the other sets here. It's better than the Libra X, at least in my opinion, but everything else here is more sort of a straight-up fight. I'm going to be sticking to my original rating of "but I like this" as in the original review. It's good, but it doesn't stand out too much. The Gate comes with better accessories, the Warner Studio is better looking, and the Zero and the Libra are less bassy and more neutral-ish if you want to do some analytical listening. This is a very competitive group, and while the Shark doesn't outright win, it doesn't outright lose either. Next up is the EW200 Maze. $40 or $46 depending on if you want the DSP cable or not, which as I said, I don't prefer, but unlocks a slightly different tuning. DSP tuning on the Maze is a little less bassy and a little less trebly. It sort of flattens out the V-shaped tuning a little bit. But if you swap the DSP version to the standard cable, you get the standard tuning. So this is a bit of a 2-in-1. This is why, for this and all the other Simgot IEMs that have DSP options, I recommend you buy the DSP version, as that way you have access to both tunings and you can pick and choose which one you like better. Now, if you've seen my review videos for basically any set in the $25 to $60 price range, you'll know this set is the gatekeeper. This level of technical performance at $40 is a benchmark for basically all other single DD sets to hit, and while there have been sets that have matched the EW200 or even exceeded it in some areas, the combination of included carry pouch, all-metal build, fantastic driver, and solid cable is still going very strong to this day. This is going to earn the EW200 a place in the "this is brilliant" tier. While the tuning and its slightly fatiguing nature won't be for absolutely everybody, I think that it is an absolutely fantastic $40 set that hasn't lost any of its competitiveness over the years. This set has a lot of staying power, and I think we'll be seeing it for a good while to come. Speaking of staying power, that's something that I think the EW300 will have for quite a while. While the launch of its 3 different versions was a little bit botched in terms of communicating the differences between the versions, I think the EW300 is still a fantastic IEM. I have a full review of it, as well as a video talking about the differences between the 3 versions. Spoiler alert, there really isn't all that much. I personally recommend you buy either the standard version for $70 or the DSP version for $80, as that will get you 4 different tunings by swapping the cable and the nozzles, rather than the 2 different tunings of the standard version. The gold nozzles, as I've mentioned, are a warmer, bassier, less detailed version of the tuning that can be found on the EM6L, and the silver nozzles are a calmed down version of the classic Simgot tuning as seen on basically all of its sisters here. The DSP version refines things a little bit, but the difference isn't really night and day, it's more subtle. I'm going to go ahead and stand by my original evaluation of this is brilliant, especially since the Moondrop May, which is the sort of other customizable option in this price range, has now increased in price to $75. It is still competitive, but it's no longer the sort of slightly more value-oriented option. People who want something even warmer sounding might want to go for the Keyfine Delchi, or people who love vocals might get a bit more out of the Sivga Chua here. But the EW300, with its 4 different tunings, extremely solid technical performance, and great accessories, I would say are still near the top of the heap in this price bracket, even with all this competition. And if you can't really choose between something warm, something vocal forward, or something customizable, this is sort of the best of all these worlds. Now it's time for the newest set on the table, for me at least, as I picked this one up specifically for this comparison. It's the standard version of the EA500, here in its DSP form. I do recommend, like with the previous 2, that you grab the DSP version over the standard version, since it turns into the standard EA500 with a normal analog cable, which you can pick up pretty cheaply. And both tunings, the DSP and the standard, are actually quite nice. The nozzles on this don't make all that much of a difference to my ears, but even then I think the 500 fits right in with the rest of the sort of $80 to $100 single dynamic driver sets, specifically things like the Titan S2 and the Moondrop Aria 2, and yes, its older sister, the 500 LM. The 500 comes across to me as a sort of more V-shaped version of the Aria 2's tuning. It has more treble sparkle, more lower mids warmth, more mid-bass impact. Vocals on the Aria are a little bit more forward, but the 500 is more exciting in terms of harmonics and overall listening experience. Aria is more relaxing though. Titan S2 is a bit brighter than even the regular 500 with those vocal harmonics and has the most forward vocals of the 2. It's a bit less refined in the treble and a bit peakier or more exciting. If you're a treble head, Titan S2 will probably be the choice for you, or honestly, the 500 LM. The DSP tuning on the standard 500 brings it a bit closer in line with the 500 LM. It's still a little bit warmer in those lower mids, which I personally do prefer, and the 500 LM still has a good bit more upper mids and overall treble energy, making it the brighter, sort of more fatiguing set. I think both tunings here on the 500 are quite nice. They're both tamer compared to the 500 LM. Think of the original 500 as a less bassy, less warm EW300, especially if you're using the DSP cable. I honestly like this set quite a lot, and I recommend that you pick up the 500 DSP over the original 500, and even over the 500 LM, honestly. I think this is a great way to sort of get the EW300-ish tuning and the 500 LM-ish tuning in sort of one IEM. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stick this in This Is Brilliant. I was just talking about it, but up next is the 500's big sister, the upgraded driver on the EA500 LM priced at $90. That lithium magnesium diaphragm driver is the biggest difference here. It takes the standard 500 and makes it even more V-shaped. It adds sub-bass rumble and more treble sparkle. As I said, compared to the DSP tuning, it's just straight up brighter. In my opinion, it's a bit more detailed. It has overall more treble energy. In terms of the nozzles here, there are 3. But I found that the gold and the silver nozzles with the red rings sounded nearly identical to me, and both of those were more relaxed than the straight-up fatiguing black ring nozzles, in my opinion. Those are just a bit too shouty and just loud for me. The gold nozzles slash the ones with the red rings are a bit more relaxed by comparison, but even those are still quite bright and energetic. The same comparisons apply here that applied with the standard 500, the Titan S2, and the Aria 2. except for this is even brighter and more fatiguing than the standard 500. This now has the most sub-bass rumble compared to the Aria 2 or the Titan S2. It has the sort of vocal forwardness of the Aria 2 and combines it with the bright, airy sparkle of the Titan S2. So it's sort of a hybrid of the two when it comes to female vocals. In the lower mids, the 500 LM is the thinnest sounding, but again, if that clarity and sort of leaner lower mid sound is something that you personally think comes off as cleaner or more detailed, then you'll like that. In my opinion, it makes it come across even brighter compared to these two. I think this tuning might be a little too fatiguing for most people, but I know a lot of people who really love just that sheer technical prowess that this set can offer. And due to that, the fact that it's basically one of the most technical single DD sets under $100, I'm going to go ahead and put this also in, but I like this. While I personally prefer the standard 500 over the 500 LM, there are lots of treble heads out there, and detail chasers will 100% prefer this one just because of that extra resolution. Now we have sort of the elder statesman of the family, the EM6L Phoenix, priced at $110 US. As I mentioned, the Phoenix is sort of the oldest set in this family, but its tuning and detail resolution have kept it relevant despite the competition having really heated up in recent times. This is the only Simgot IEM I have with a QDC connector, so keep that in mind if you're shopping for cable upgrades. It's no secret that I like the EM6L. I think it's the original sort of Simgot for everyone before the EW300 came along. And although it has its issues like the QDC connectors causing reliability issues and the metal surrounds on these nozzles coming unglued and falling off, this is still a bestseller for a reason, and there's a reason they're still selling it. There are newer hybrid sets that have been released, things like the Defiant, the Explorer, and the Padsmith IEM. This is a lot of competition. The tuning, however, on all of these doesn't exactly match the EM6L here. Despite its age, the Phoenix is still relatively unique in its price range, and if you want that sort of detailed but not super hyper detailed, relaxing but still Simgot-ish type sound signature, these three, while fantastic, don't really match it. I do think that this set is ripe for an update. Even then, I'm going to put it next to its little sister in This Is Brilliant. It is still the king of the less intense Simgots. It sits above the EW300 and the EA500 in both its standard and DSP forms. It is, in my opinion, the most resolving of the three, thanks to those 4 balanced armatures joining that dynamic driver. Yeah, I just think it's time for the Phoenix to get a rebirth. It desperately needs an upgrade. At $150, we find the Supermix 4, a set that took the scene by storm when it debuted about a year ago, and honestly, it's easy to see why. Its Harman-inspired tuning and quad-bridge configuration did something that we thought was unthinkable. It took the fight straight to Truth Ear's well-established flagship, the Nova. This and the Nova are such natural sparring partners for each other. Extremely similar tunings, exactly the same price, very similar accessories package. Which one you're going to prefer is going to come down to sort of how V-shaped you want your sound to be, how much bass and treble energy you can handle. The Supermix 4 is a little bit more V-shaped than the Nova. It packs more sub-bass presence and a little bit extra treble sparkle and airiness overall. Honestly, what I think the bigger difference is going to be is the comfort. As you can see here, let me grab the right one of the Nova here. The Nova is the chunkier, thicker, and overall much larger of the two. And I do see people having more fitment issues with the Nova than on the Supermix. That said, the Supermix, as I said, is a bit brighter and might be fatiguing to some people. There are other sets in this sort of price range. The $150 to sort of $200 range is heating up quite a lot, but none of them are tuned quite as close to the Supermix 4 as the Nova is, and these two are sort of the only names in the game for let's hit the Harman target as close as possible in this price range. Nova, as I said, would be a little bit more relaxing to listen to, a little bit smoother. Supermix 4, more incisive, more exciting, tiny bit more detailed depending on where you personally perceive detail. Something that the Supermix 4 has up its sleeve, however, the Nova doesn't, is that secret bass head tuning I mentioned earlier that you can unlock by using an impedance adapter or a higher output impedance source. This thing with an impedance adapter is an even more intense, more rumbly, more punchy presentation than the Kiwi Ears Punch or the Mega 5 EST bass, talking purely about the bass presentation. This thing with an impedance adapter is crazy, it's fun, and it can be a real shame if that's the tuning that you're getting unintentionally. I have seen anecdotal reports as well as talked to some people who have bought the Supermix 4 use it on sort of motherboard audio or other audio outputs with higher output impedance and are just extremely disappointed by the muddy, bloated bass presentation here. So if you have the Supermix 4 and you're about to return it because it's super bassy, go ahead and buy yourself a cheap dongle DAC that has low output impedance and try and get the sound that it's supposed to have out of it. All of those things being said, I'm going to put this in This Is Brilliant, even though I personally am not the biggest fan of the Harman Target. I still think that this level of technical performance and a tuning executed this well should be celebrated, and I think it's a great performer. At $220 US, the EA1000 Fermat presents an interesting conundrum. At $220, it's right in the mix with the rest of the sort of $200 premium single DD class of IEMs. Things like the CVJ Yukimi, the Moondrop Cadence, and the Tangent Origin. And while I don't have an Origin, I do have the other two. The Yukimi is straight up bright compared to the more V-shaped Fermat. It's got less bass, less forward vocals, and much more energy through the mid-treble and upper treble. The most interesting comparison for the Fermat here is, I think, the Cadence and by extension, the Kato, which the Cadence purportedly replaces. Let me bring it in right there, so you can see. The Fermat sounds to me like a hybrid of the Cadence and the Kato. You've got Kato's bouncier, warmer, more lush-sounding lower mids and bass presentation, but you have some of the extra vocal forwardness that the Cadence has. It's a pretty interesting middle ground between these two. Now, the thing that I haven't talked about yet is that this is not really a single DD set. If you look right here, you have that open to the ear passive radiator behind that grill, and that, I think, is what helps the Fermat become a bit more special. To some people, myself included, that passive radiator has an effect where it adds more of a spatial tonality to some tracks, it widens the soundstage, adds a bit of tallness to it, it just makes it a more immersive listening experience. If you look at this as sort of a Cadence-Kato hybrid with more soundstage than either of them, I think the Fermat looks like a pretty good deal for $220. Where I think the Fermat absolutely falls down, however, and honestly by extension most of the entire premium single DD market, is when you start comparing them to their little sisters. And the Fermat's little sister, the 500LM and the 500, are largely responsible for this sort of perception of value. The 500LM essentially sounds like a cleaner, brighter Fermat with matching detail retrieval and resolution, and it's less than half the price of the Fermat. The 500LM is really hard to ignore if you're only considering value, and that's what's going to put the Fermat in but I like this rather than This Is Brilliant. I really do like this set a lot, and I do listen to it more than the 500LM or any of the other single DD SimGots. But if you're shopping for a single DD set in today's economy, I just think that the 500 or the 500LM are just straight up better values than what you can find here on the Fermat. Last, but certainly not least, is the new kid on the block, at least as far as SimGot is concerned, the absolutely epic ET142, or Chameleon, as I call it. ET142, like some of the others, already has a full review on this channel. It's one of only 5 IEMs to have achieved a ranking of "you should buy this" on my ranking list. If you didn't watch that review, I'll go over the sort of final talking points real quick. The Chameleon comes with an amazing suite of accessories, including a modular cable and a great case. In addition, the 4 different nozzles here allow it to approximate what I call the 3 most popular tunings in planar IEMs. It can go from airy, sparkly, and technical, sort of critical listening set to warm, bassy, relaxing planar with a swap of a nozzle just like that. It's an incredible value that is essentially a 3-in-1 planar IEM, and it's using the latest generation of planar driver as well as that PZT tweeter for a little bit of extra spice at the very top end. This thing can match its original inspiration, the Raptco Hook X. It's got the classic sort of V-shaped planar tuning. It can also match the S12, which is sort of more popular V-shaped tuning. It can go for the S12 Pro. It can go for the SO8. It can match the S15 at times. More importantly, if you decide to forego the Superstage modules and rock the Black Power modules instead of the Superstage ones here, it can match the Fat Freak Quantum. If you are looking to get a planar and you have around $200 in your budget, this should be it, period. If those 4 included nozzles aren't to your liking, They include foam, so you can just stuff foam down the titanium nozzles until you get to the tuning you want. That's what I did with my Amigo mod. I'll put the graph up here. All that is all of the foams from the EW300 and the foams on this shoved into each of the nozzles here. Personalize it however you want. The ranking remains unchanged. This is a you should buy this IEM all day, every day. The cable's fantastic. The shells are fantastic. It's great. And that's all the Simgot sets, ranked, summarized, and roughly recommended. That's 3 buyer's guides in the books. These are rather large undertakings with all of the comparison listening and writing and stuff that happens behind the scenes to make these happen. So it might be a while before the next one comes up. I'm going to try to make it the Moondrop Buyer's Guide, but it will probably be a while to get some sets there. I'm missing the Harman and the variations, so need to figure out a way to get those. I also don't own the cadens that I showed. That's a loaner, so I need to figure out how to get that one in here. Also, I might do a Kiwi Ears Buyer's Guide at some point. I am missing some things in that. I'm missing the Quartet and the Quintet and the Canta and a couple of other things, so it'll be a while before you get another Buyer's Guide, but hopefully this will be enough to tide you over. Until then, need to make some phone calls and talk to some companies and see if I can get some sponsorships. But for now, that's going to be it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this Buyer's Guide. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate all your continued support. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.